Hey guys, so today's lesson is on solving rate problems, and first let's kind of figure out what rate is to begin with. So rate is, again, you're comparing something like a ratio. You're comparing two quantities, and those two things are measured in two different types of units. So you could be measuring kilometers versus time, so hours, how long it took you to do something, or how long it took you to drive a particular type or how a particular distance. So, I drove 60 kilometers in an hour. Another example would be if I was delivering magazines and I could deliver 50 magazines, and every time I delivered 50 magazines, I would get $10. So again, you're talking about the amount of magazines that you're delivering versus the amount of money that you would be receiving. Another way to look at it is in a job. You would get, you could say, oh, I make $12 an hour. So again, you would write the rate with a slash in the middle of the two things you're comparing, and you always have to have a unit, and these things are units. So it could be centimeters, it could be dollars, it could be hours, it could be minutes. So all these things are all units. So equivalent rates kind of work the same as equivalent ratios, where you would have a rate such as I drove 90 kilometers in 2 hours. And another way to write a rate is you could write it where it looks like a fraction as well. It doesn't have to be like this, 90 kilometers per 2 hours. And I'll show you that sometimes you're going to want to have it like that just to be able to work with it and figure things out around it. So an equivalent rate would be something like 90 kilometers in 2 hours is also equal to 45 kilometers an hour, or I'll put 1 hour there. So again, it's pretty much you're traveling the same distance, but we've just made it equivalent, and it works just like equivalent ratios that I did yesterday. So again, if you took that pizza and I ate half of the pizza, I just cut it in half. I ate half of it. But what if I were to cut it into 4? It doesn't change the amount that I ate. It just means that now the pizza's cut into 4, and now I've eaten two pieces, but it's this exact same as half. Again, if I cut the pizza again, if you've noticed, I've eaten the same amount, but we've gone from 1/2 to 2/4, now to 3/6. So we have all these different fractions happening, or ratios or whatever, but they're the exact same amount that's being eaten. So equivalent rates are the same thing. 90 kilometers in 2 hours is the same as driving 40 kilometers in 1 hour, because all you're doing to 90 is you're dividing by 2 to get 45. Same thing here, you're dividing by 2 to get 1. So as long as you have the same scale factor, if you remember that from yesterday's lesson, so you're dividing or multiplying by the exact same amount, you're going to get either an equivalent ratio, an equivalent fraction, or in this case, an equivalent rate for today. Okay, so let's do a bit of a word problem. So Peter started a new part-time job, and he's making pizza. I just love pizza. It's always about pizza. So he's working at a pizza joint, and for every 3 hours he works, he earns $27. Okay? So now we're going to write a rate. What if I said, okay, write a rate for Peter's earnings in 3 hours, and use the hours, the 3 hours, as the second term? What that means is you would write it as a rate. So he made $27 in, so this line could mean in or per 3 hours. That's how you would write a rate. You would write one thing on one side with a unit, and comparing something on the other side, again with a unit. You guys are in instrumental music right now, and all I can hear is like all your instruments. It's kind of funny. Anyways, so in terms of finding an equivalent ratio, or sorry, an equivalent rate, I'm going to pose another question. So, what if I wanted to find out? So he makes $27 in 3 hours. What if I wanted to find out, so $27 in 3 hours, what if I wanted to find out, well, after 24 hours, how much is he going to make? And what I would do in this case is I would set it up like a fraction. I would write it like this. Remember to always include your units. And then I would do equals to, and I'm trying to find out in 24 hours. Sorry, that's an H there. It might look a little bit confusing. So in 24 hours. So you line up your units. So you have to think 24 hours is going to line up with hours on this side. So I'm going to write my equivalent rate there, set up my proportion, use the information that I know, 24 hours, and now we have to find out, well, what does he make in 24 hours? So again, I've lined up my units. Hours are on the bottom. So then I think, okay, I have to find my scale factor. How did I go from 3 hours to 24 hours? Do I need to multiply or divide? Well, the hours are increasing, so I'm multiplying. What am I multiplying by? Well, I know that 3 times 8 is 24. What if I didn't know that? What if I had no clue about my multiplication? Just work backwards. Just as a reminder, you go 24 divided by 3 equals 8. And that's how you'd get your scale factor. You'd know. So then I know that 3 times 8 equals 24. So 3 times 8 equals 24. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do the top. I have to have the same scale factor. So I would do 27 times 8. And that is 216. And I always have to remember my units. Is it 216 what? Bananas? No. It's dollar amounts. So $27 in 3 hours means that I also make $216 in 24 hours. So what I've just shown you, these two things are equivalent rates. Equivalent rates. Okay? I've also shown you a proportion because you're comparing one rate to the other. If you remember from yesterday's lesson, that's also proportion. And I also am using my scale factor again, right? What I'm multiplying or dividing by. Okay, I'm going to give you another example that's going to involve one extra step. Okay, so on a trip from, I don't know, Toronto to Niagara Falls, I drove 240 kilometers in 10 minutes. Just kidding. In 3 hours. If a question says, if it asks you, what was the average rate? You'll see this language a lot. This average business. Okay, so what does it mean to find the average? It means to find what you would do per one. So in this case, in 1 hour, what did I drive? Or in 1 day, or 1 minute. It's always finding per one. Okay, if that makes sense. So for example, if I make $50 in 4 hours, finding the average, I would be finding what I make in 1 hour. So you're always finding that per one. So in this case, how do we find the average rate? Well, what I would do is set it up like a proportion again. So you do 240 kilometers in 3 hours is equal to, now average rate per one means per 1 hour. So I line up my units again, hour and hours are both on the bottom, and I say, okay, how did I move from 3 to 1? Well, I'm decreasing, right? I'm going from 3 to 1, it's going down, so I'm dividing, and I divide by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. Well, whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. Have to have the same scale factor. Divide by 3. 240 divided by 3. I can do that in my head because I can just kind of pretend the zero's not there for a second. Sorry, someone came to the door. What was I saying? 240 divided by 3, I can do that easily. Pretend the zero's not there. 24 divided by 3 is 8. So that means 240 divided by 3 is 80. And always remember the units. Okay, so that means that 240 kilometers in 3 hours, the average rate is 80 kilometers per hour. So I'm just going to put that again here. 3 hours equals 80 kilometers an hour. Now, what if I said, okay, suppose it took me 2.5 hours to drive the distance? What would the average rate be then? So instead of 3 hours, now it's 240, or sorry, it's 2.5. So again, I just set up my proportion, set up my equivalent rates, 240 now in 2.5 hours. And I'm trying to find the average rate again, which means per 1, which means down here per 1 hour. So now how do I move from 2.5 to 1? Well, I divide by 2.5. Need the same scale factor up here. Divide by 2.5. And 240 divided by 2.5 is 96. So 96 kilometers. So which means 240 kilometers in 2.5 hours. The average rate would be that I drive 96 kilometers per hour. Okay, I'm going to do one more example with you before you do one on your own. So just say you are delivering newspapers and you make, it's not going to sound a lot at all, but just for the sake of this question, just bear with me. You make $6 for every 50 newspapers you deliver. If you deliver 450 newspapers, I'm going to say P for papers. P. So if you deliver 450 papers in a week, how much will you earn? So $6 for every 50. How much will you make if you deliver 450? So again, set up your equivalent rates or your proportion where you're comparing what looks like one fraction equal to another fraction. So you deliver 50 papers and you get $6. That's going to be equal to, well, I've just told you how much are you going to make after 450 papers. So again, it makes it much easier if you just line up the units, because then you'll know what number to put on the top and what number to put on the bottom. Sorry, people keep knocking on the door and I'm getting so distracted of where I am in the video. Anyway, so like I was saying, I think I was saying that it makes it easier if you just line up the units, so papers with papers. So if you know that if you're trying to move from 50 to 450, you have to say, okay, what times 50 is going to equal 450? Well, if you don't know that, again, just work backwards. Go 450 divided by 50. And an easy way to do that is you can do 45 divided by 5. Just add the 0. So 45 divided by 50 is 9, which means that the scale factor is times 9. So 50 times 9 is 450. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. You have the same scale factor. So you go 6 times 9. And that's 54, which means that you make $54 for 450 newspapers sold. Okay? Okay, so these are the two questions that I'd like you to do